Onboarding for me starts from day one when talent looks at our career site. So we ensure in internal communications the job descriptions are all aligned, the messagings follow our principles and our values for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is also in there.
Hello and welcome to the All Onboard podcast, your go-to resource for all things employee onboarding. I'm your host, Thomas Kunjapu, founder and CEO of Cleary, and today we are excited to have with us Eileen Page, who is a global head of talent brand strategy, communications, and DEIB at Feedzai. Eileen brings over 30 years of experience in creating impactful onboarding programs that span across 18 countries. But crucially, it integrates internal communications, employer branding, DEIB principles into every aspect of this process and every other aspect of the employee journey. So with no further ado, Eileen, welcome to the show.
Hi, Thomas. Nice to be here.
You've done a few different things in your career within the broader HR world. I'm excited to get into that more in depth and how you're seeing the roles evolving. Can we start with maybe talking about internal communications? Could you tell us a little bit about how internal communications plays a role in the onboarding experience?
Sure. So internal communications is very important for messaging because you want all of your messaging to align when you're externally talking to talent and when you're internally talking to your talent. And so the way that works for onboarding is onboarding for me starts from day one when talent looks at our website, our career site, right? So we ensure in internal communications the job descriptions are all aligned, the messagings follow our principles and our values for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging is also in there with making the job description without gender pronouns and things like that. And then when we communicate, the talent acquisition team, internal comms, I have reviewed all of those or written those communications that our applicant tracking system sends out automatically to talent when they hit our website, right? And for some of the other communications, or in-mails that are written by the talent acquisition team. And then also when it goes to onboarding, there's a few messages that are kicked in that are also done by internal communications, myself, to ensure, again, alignment with the messaging and that it follows our brand as well as our tone of voice for all talent.
Got it. When you say day zero, you're actually talking about well beyond day one. It's the pre-boarding experience and even into the recruiting and talent experience. So you're trying to make that cohesive and feel on brand, which is a little bit related to employer brand and how you think about the value proposition that you put out there for talent. I guess same question from that perspective. How does that come into the onboarding experience?
Employer brand is really important because that's how you attract talent to your brand, right? And this is why I think onboarding starts. It's the whole employee life cycle, right? Employee life cycle starts when they look at your career website, for me, because all of those play into the perception of the company, how they feel, the look. So employer branding is like the look, the feel, the aesthetic, what we bring that is unique to talent. All of that also plays into branding is very big. It's one of those things like when you say you're going into a meditation room and you go in, you're like, why is this off? Something's off here. You may not consciously know, but the pictures are crooked or only 5 of the 10 candles are lit. It's one of those things to me, employer branding plays when you're looking at something, when you're reading something. So that's why employer branding, internal comms, DEIB are all weaved together because they create that overall holistic experience for talent internally and externally.
That's interesting. It makes me think of how all of these processes, all 3 functions, you collaborate with. From the first perspective, it's the marketing for talent, right? It's the value proposition, why people might hear about you, what they think about you, what kind of role this might be. And then you go through the sales process, which is when you're talking to recruiters one-on-one, where it's individualized and that there's that process that you're impacting. And then you buy the product, right?
Yes.
And then now you're often starting to show how that will work in almost like customer onboarding, it's employee onboarding or implementation process. So you can actually prove out what you're saying so far. And it's interesting because you have a hand in all those moments while the folks that you're collaborating with might be focused on individual steps in that process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I connect all of those things together for the organization within the people team at Feedzai.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Hope you're enjoying the episode so far. Are you curious to see how your onboarding program stacks up against the industry's best? Check out Theory's latest onboarding assessment tool. It offers in-depth analysis and customized recommendations to enhance every aspect of your employee onboarding, from pre-boarding to company culture integration and more. Whether you're just setting up your onboarding program or you're a CHRO at a Fortune 100 company, this assessment can improve your onboarding know-how. Check it out at gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-assessment. You can also find the link in the episode notes. Now back to the show.
Do you have any examples that come to mind of things that you've learned in one process that impacted the other, like something the employee value proposition or the employer brand side that's really starting to resonate and you start exploring further down the funnel in the onboarding process, or vice versa?
So when I first started at Feedzai, there was a lot of different components that we needed to go through to ensure a very streamlined, succinct experience for talent. And when you looked at that, I needed to work with our head of people experience, which is our human resources function, our head of talent acquisition, as well as our CPO, and go through a whole process because there are multiple platforms that we used, right? There's the career website, applicant tracking system, our external socials, our system, and then the decks we use for all of this once we bring them aboard. Basically, it's our employee value proposition in a document that's designed specifically to look like our brand, like the career website, so that when talent looks at all of these things, they're like, oh, yeah, this is the people experience team. It all looks the same. So branding all of those, ensuring all of the communications are the same, making sure it's inclusive. That's why everything I do, I feel, is weaved together, even though generally speaking, these are three different functions, but I bring them together for the people team.
Let's talk about the third one: diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. Same question. How do you bring that hat and that perspective towards onboarding and the employee lifecycle?
We work in 18 plus countries, right? And English is our main language for the organization. But when you're working across the globe, DEIB comes into that because you have to think of all of the different locations, all of the different practices, ways of being. So for example, in America, all caps are okay now. Back in the day, all caps meant we're yelling, don't do all caps. But there are certain countries where all caps are not okay. That's a simplistic example, but these are the things you have to understand in DEIB, and which plays into internal communications. When you look at that, you also want to ensure that you're following all of that. You don't use any slang in your communications. Sometimes companies, they want to be your friend and they use slang, right? Slang's not going to work. American slang's not going to work in another country. First of all, what does it even mean? I try to explain to people what's funny in the US. We have 50 states. That's 50 countries. I'm from California. I go someplace else. I don't know what's happening because the slang is different. So we have to make sure we wipe that, right? That's inclusivity. And then we want to make sure that everything within the whole process through onboarding doesn't single anyone out, doesn't make anyone feel like they don't belong because they're from somewhere else. They are different. So all of that's super important. I'm really passionate about DEIB. I want to make sure everybody has the same experience at Feedzai, no matter where they're at.
With that perspective, would you have any advice or thoughts, like practical steps that people could take? I'm thinking especially about companies or HR teams that don't have someone with that background, full-time at least, on staff. Right? Are there recommendations you'd have about things that you might tactically include as process steps to ensure that you're bringing DEIB perspective into your onboarding, pre-boarding, recruiting process?
Yeah, one of the big things is collaboration, right? Sometimes we get into our own work and don't go outside to speak to others. So if you don't have a person in spot like me, collaborate across the organization with the different type of communications that you have, right? Especially when they come, we have 5 generations in the workforce right now, and all of them are going to read something different. So if you collaborate and say, this is what we're trying to get across, does this make sense to you? Do you get what we're trying to say? And it could just even be 1 or 2 paragraphs. And through that, you can create a process based on the feedback that you get on how to create your own tone of voice and communication that weaves in DEI and B, and to ensure that no one feels excluded because of the language, which can happen sometimes depending on how you write it, especially if it sways to a certain skill set or tech set, right? You have to keep it as simple as possible and as literal as possible to include everybody, making sure to have your principles or values weaved into that, which will help with the DEI and B, because that's usually companies will be looking at that when they create their values and their principles, right?
That's great. Let's talk about just scale, right? You mentioned 18 countries that y'all are in, and we're talking about that from a DE&I perspective, how that means that there's, for example, multiple languages, obviously multiple cultures that you're working through. But for your team and your colleagues centrally trying to ensure there's a great and consistent experience through this whole employee life cycle, that presents significant challenges to enable all of this. Can you talk a little bit about how you work on implementing a consistent onboarding process?
A couple of the key things that we have, because we're a flex remote, right? And what that means is that we have a certain 90-day onboarding experience. No matter where you are, you're going to go through this 90-day onboarding experience. Now, if you're on site, some of the things will happen in the office. But if you're remote, like I am, one of the things is that your first day you meet with your manager. If you're in an office, you go to lunch with your manager. When you're remote, they sent me a gift card to get from Uber Eats. So I could get lunch delivered to me and then have lunch with my manager. Trying to create that same type of experience throughout. There's a checklist, and every employee gets the checklist as well as the manager. And then the people experience team plays a part in ensuring that happens. The people experience team are using the same deck that employer branding has created, utilizing the same communications. Also, when you're in an office, you get to talk to a lot of people all the time. When you're remote, there's no like, oh, we're going to have coffee together. The team has created onboarding buddies. So that way, this individual can take you through your first 90 days, talk about the different things, the culture, acronyms that are specific to Feedzai, all different kinds of things that you miss when you're not in an office. So all of those are, in essence, to create that same streamlined and overall experience for each Feedzaian across the globe.
It sounds like a lot of your answer had to do with creating a consistent experience, whether someone is in office or remote. So it sounds like a core recommendation is whatever your processes are, try to think about parallel experiences for your remote and your in-office employees. And I guess fundamentally, I think you said just the approach of having 18 countries, it doesn't mean 36 offices or something like in 18 countries. I imagine at least one country where there's only 1 or 2 people, right, who are in a home office. But it allows you with this model to scale out into getting talent, having access to talent in many new places while still having a mechanism to hold a company together. Do you have any thoughts on how that's evolved for Feedzai or just like the industry in general? Do you think Feedzai would have been in 1 or 3 countries if it wasn't for COVID? And would your challenges have been very different if COVID hadn't happened?
I think that eventually for Feedzai, without the pandemic, it would have eventually happened because that's the best way for me. But I think for anyone is the flex remote, allowing to get talent anywhere across the globe. But I think it cycled it up faster for Feedzai to have the pandemic, because I think that a large amount of the population was going to offices we couldn't do that. Then that opens up, okay, now we're creating flex remote work policies. How are we going to keep the engagement when we had all these office activities? And through there, created the innovation and spawned the ideas to have this consistent approach across the globe to ensure that everyone had that same experience, no matter where they were. And then as we continued, we're like, oh, look at all this talent we're getting from here. Look at all this. We can have talent here to support these clients, things like that. And it's just worked really well for us. That would be my advice to any organization, because there's that whole debate, come back to the office, don't come back to the office, all of this. We can't engage without being in the office. Don't be afraid. You can engage your employees if they are by themselves in Oceanside, California, like I am, and there's no employees around me. So I'm fully engaged.
You said something that I want to go a little bit deeper on, which is as the model evolved, you realize it's working just as well, right? We're able to be productive. We're able to support new customers. It's something we know that it is working, especially if you take it from a new talent onboarding perspective. What is that nugget, that moment in time, or that measurement? How do you exactly know that it is working, that you can have a model and you've all your processes around to try to get the entire employee base successful, especially new employees? How do you know that it's working, especially when the model is shifted to more remote?
There's a couple things we use. Some are metrics like surveys, employee engagement surveys. We have a 30-day onboarding survey that all employees get, and also through sentiment. I lead what is called the Feedzai Brand Ambassador Group, which is employees from across the globe, top to bottom, and talking to them. How's it going? What's happening? Because I think one of those things is to ensure that we always personalize. Surveys are great, but to always have the personalization. We also have a listening tour that our head of talent management goes around the globe and has sessions, small breakout sessions with Feedzaians to find out what's happening, what's going on. And so that's how we do it at Feedzai, right? Surveys, which those are your metrics that you can improve upon and that you can look at with data. And then sentiment, in the sense, talking to Feedzai in person. And I call Zoom in person because I'm remote. So to me, it's virtually in person, but that's how we do it.
Got it. So you're mixing the quantitative with the qualitative and coming up with a holistic picture together. So I wanted to switch gears a little bit because one of the things that was interesting to me that I wanted to dig into was, number one, your current title, but also all the different titles you've held in your career, which is pretty amazing across different sub-functions of HR. It feels like you've really explored a bunch. Could you give us a sense of the kinds of titles, the kinds of work that you've done, like in your career across these various HR functions, just so folks have a sense before we get into this next segment about what that means about the role a little bit?
I do have a varied experience. I have worked on the agency side as well as the corporate side. If you're looking at the people team, right? I have done recruitment, head of recruitment. I've done payroll, human resource business partner work in some of the roles I was in, and then employer branding, internal communications, DEIB, which I'm really passionate about. I've been in retail, and a lot of people don't take corporate and retail. They think they don't mix, and they actually do. So I worked for Starbucks as a store manager. And when you're a store manager, you're in business. So you do business operations, you're in marketing, you're in recruitment, you're in business partner work, you're in finance, profit and loss. So I was there for almost 5 years, and it was a wealth of experience, right? Customer service, all of those things are touch points. And I think all of those things have helped me in my career, putting all of this together. So that has helped me currently, but move through my career with the business acumen, how a business actually works, how to explain that, how to articulate that, right? And then to help facilitate that, when I have done these different roles, again, it's business acumen on how things work. When I'm looking to do currently communications and different things like that, I know all of these different functions and can relate to them. So I've also worked from the creative side. I love art. So I love the creative teams, and I've run a creative team for a while. That's just like a snippet. I've been working a long time.
But it's fascinating because you don't see a lot of recruiters who've done payroll, for example, right? Not to mention like all the outside of HR experience, which is like really interesting and cool. And being a store manager is just like a mini GM, right? You're just running this entire unit top to bottom. What's fascinating to me about all that is now it's led you to this current role where you have
Yes.
a multi hyphenated title, right? And I imagine that it's purposeful, right? We've talked about it, internal communications, DEIB, and as well as employer branding, right?
Mhm.
Given all that background, how did your current title come to be?
So when I first started at Feedzai, employer branding was more of the main role that I had with internal communications thrown in. And then our VP of people, based on my skill set and what I'm passionate about, asked me if I'd take DEI and B. And I said, yeah, because they all weave together. And the internal comms just became a bigger part of it. And then it's just here, I was able to just show how all three of these could be combined. And then again, I've been working a long time. So I have the ability to do all of them and prioritize how they need to go out based on our business and what we're doing. But that's how it came to be. And it's a huge title. I have yet to think, if somebody has an idea, please ping me on LinkedIn on how you encompass all those three into a shorter title. But it's just to represent the Feedzaians that all three of these things are equally important. And somebody is heading them to ensure that we have them.
So that makes sense how the role evolved there organically. But from my perspective, I've just seen how there have been a lot more roles within HR titles that used to be things that individual, distinct people might have ownership over being combined and remixed a little bit. And I would add in people operations or HRG into that mix, L&D into that mix, recruiters in some cases. That's more rare, but kind of taking on onboarding a bit, or at least a little bit farther, more aspects of it. Just fewer people on the HR team supporting the same level of complexity of an organization. So the roles within the department and the department itself is evolving from my perspective. But given all that context, what would you recommend for someone who's young coming into an HR career? Maybe they're handling onboarding, right? Or they're handling DNIB, or just one of these like aspects, right? As an individual contributor, how can they set themselves up for success in the future?
One, I'm huge on always learning, always trying to attain different types of knowledge, right? So never stop learning. Just because you have your degree doesn't mean you stop learning. And that could be reading books, that could be having outside courses. It's what fits your life and how you like to learn, right? It's very common to see subject matter experts and they've done the same thing, which is fine. But I think diversifying yourself allows you a greater opportunity to do things, as well as an understanding of the business, which allows you to also create new innovative ways to do things where you're working. I'm just going to give you an example of what I did. First, I was looking for what I loved to do since we spend a lot of time at work. And I wanted to understand everything. I didn't enjoy it when I was doing payroll and I didn't understand how we got there with how the business worked, right? What is the labor? How does this make sense? I didn't enjoy when I was recruiting and I didn't understand the operations side or how certain functions work. So I wanted to know all of those things. So I talked to a lot of people. I collaborated a lot. I read a lot. And I decided to be a generalist at things, right? I'm an expert at things, but I'm also a generalist in the facts that I do many things. And so for young people, if you're working in a role, you're just out of college or something, if you look at my LinkedIn background, I have a lot of nonprofit. That's where I got my experience. Nonprofit organizations for certain things, right? So I've been a facilitator, an instructional designer for nonprofits. And because when a company is looking at you, all experience works out. It doesn't have to be just the experience from where you're making money at. It can be anything you do, volunteering, running the Girl Scouts. Honestly, we could sit here all day and think about all the different things that you can do that are relatable, right? So that's my advice, is to continue learning, find mentors in different fields than you're at to talk to you, and then find some volunteer work and go do some things. And then in your work, when somebody says, who wants to be on a cross collaboration team? Who wants to work on a project? Say yes. Don't be afraid. Oh, I don't have that experience. Who cares? Say yes. Go for it. Be bold. Don't ever be afraid to do anything. I read this great book called Failing Forward. That's how you learn, right? Because you don't really ever fail. Mistakes are made, things happen, and you learn from them. So the next time it's better. The book I read is Being a Generalist, right? And how it was talking about sports, though, and how different sports figures who varied their background, like played chess, were better at the sport they picked, right? Because the way they thought worked differently. I guess that's a really long explanation for my advice, but that's what I did.
Hey, it's Thomas here. Now, you and I might think it's obvious that people are your biggest resource, and investing in your onboarding program to make it world-class is a bet you want to make. But how do you talk about this with your CEO or CFO so that you can get them on board with investing in an updated onboarding program? They're always looking for something that can save money and boost productivity at the same time. Well, I've got something exciting for you. Check out Cleary's Onboarding ROI Calculator. It's easy to use. Just enter some info about your current onboarding process and your company and see how much time and money you could be saving with a modern onboarding solution. Head on over to gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI to give it a try. See what you learn and let us know what you think. Again, that's gocleary.com/onboarding-ROI. You can also find a link in the episode notes. Now, back to the show.
This is great. Understanding the business. This is something I've heard as a common thread, as something that they want in their HR partners that they're collaborating with, as well as from successful HR folks.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's something to highlight here, because it means that you're able to speak the language of, at some level, your customers, right? Whether that's the employee that's just joining, they need to figure out the business because they're doing customer service or sales or marketing or engineering. They need to understand it to do their job. And it's important for you to do that as well. And then also with executives, because you're able to speak their language and talk about trade-offs. I just wanted to see if we can get something tactical away. So if you're in like a junior or mid-level kind of HR role and you want to understand the business more, what should that person do tomorrow?
They should create connections, 20-minute, you call them coffee connections, however you want, with leaders across the business, wanting to understand their role. And then ask that individual, if I was wanting to learn more, who do you think I should talk to in your group? You can span it every day. You can have a 15 to 20-minute connection with another employee in the organization, asking them what they do, how they do it, and why they do it. And then from there, you can do all kinds of things. Anything that the person says might spark something. And you find a book that, oh, now I get it. You find articles, you find a podcast like this, you find different things to help you garner that understanding. And that doesn't take a lot of time. Like if you commit to 1 hour a day to reaching out and understanding the business through different mediums, 6 months, you'll be amazed at how much you understand and how much it affects your role and how much better you feel about what you do.
That's great. And that approach has a double whammy, which is you've also built a strong network at the same time. You've gotten to understand, know personally more and more people who are making the whole thing tick. I had another idea for this as you were speaking, which does not have that particular benefit, but there's arguably no more cost and time. You're attending all hands meetings or helping craft communications, helping enable onboarding programs. Just don't zone out is one way to say it, or just make sure you understand everything, right?
Yes.
All of that content that's coming in from various departments, various stakeholders, new information that's coming in from executives. If you're just present and actually paying attention, it's pretty hard over time, right? At least at some level, learn the business, I would imagine. So there's just something about just being present in all these things that it's a little bit tough because folks on people teams are just like, rolling up their sleeves and enabling all these processes and are just saying, whew, okay, at least it started and ended without a hitch. And I made sure that happened. So you're in that mode. But if you could also just switch that off once things are smooth and just actually go into learning mode yourself, theoretically, that should not cost you any more time.
Yeah, no, not at all. All hands meetings are a great place to find out a lot of information. And then who's ever speaking, you're like, oh, I didn't understand that part. Let me reach out to them. And if they're busy, oh, can you tell me who on your team could help me understand? Everybody wants to help everybody. Nobody will ever say, you want to know more? Terrible. Not going to do it. They'll be like, oh, we're so excited that you're excited to learn what we're doing and what we're talking about. And they'll even do that in the all hands meetings Q&A, which, what, to your point, doesn't take away from the time. In Q&A, you don't understand something, don't be afraid to say, I don't understand. What are you talking about? What does that actually mean?
Yeah, this is all useful for folks in HR and people teams because the role is going to evolve and there's going to be new skill sets and new things that you need. But understanding the business fundamentally will be this core thing that is already something that is very clear that everyone wants from forward thinking like HR leaders and individual contributors. And this whole section has been a hoodwink in the sense that, yes, we're talking about folks in HR, but the same thing applies to creating a wonderful onboarding process because meeting people and going out of your way to meet people and learn things from across the board is a great thing to encourage all employees to be doing as they get on board at the company, and paying attention and understanding what's happening in all hands meetings and learning what's happening across different functions is another aspect of getting a great collaborative environment. So if I were to put it all together a bit, Eileen, when you think about just the HR function and the kinds of skill sets and people that you need to enable this workforce of the future, which Feedzai sounds a lot like that, right? It's operating seamlessly in multiple countries. Some people are remote, some people are a couple of days, some people are in a home office by themselves, some people might meet up here and there in a city, and there are processes and tools binding the entire company together. Where do you imagine things are evolving, right, in a couple of years? What are the needs for an organization like Feedzai, or what are the kind of skill sets and truly important things that HR will be enabling such an organization of the future?
I believe for HR teams to continue to learn about different industries, learn about global organizations, right? Even if you're working in a company that's local or smaller, just continue to expand your knowledge to help with all processes, right? I think being super open-minded in HR to all different ways, all different organizations, sizes will help us for the future. And then the understanding, which is key, how each generation is engaged. Since we have so many generations in the workforce and they're all different. And how do you continue to engage each set of your talent to fulfill what's needed to be fulfilled?
Wonderful. Okay, so it's been a great conversation so far. I'd love to move us into our lightning round of questions. Are you ready to go, Eileen?
Ready.
All right, so I have to ask someone from Oceanside, California, beaches or mountains?
Beaches all day.
All day. Okay, not surprising. Is there a piece of advice that you ever received in your life that's stuck with you that you'd like to share?
A great friend of mine, we've been friends for almost 20 years, Mickey, she told me early on in our friendship, be yourself. Being yourself will allow me to find true happiness. And it's stuck. And this is one of the things I love about Feedzai is my sense of belonging because I'm authentic self. Not everyone, even in 2024, is accepting of a shaved head, pink hair, and multiple tattoos. But I'm treated no different at Feedzai. I fit right in. Her advice is the best thing. And I'd give that advice to anybody. Be your authentic self. And if you don't fit, then that's not the place for you.
If you could wave a magic wand and drastically improve one thing about how people everywhere are onboarded into a new organization, you want to change just one thing that would just happen, what would that be?
An unlimited budget to bring every quarter all new employees to one site for a 3-day cultural immersion experience. I think that would be so fun.
Most companies had that back in 2019. And it was way more than 3 days. But could you tell me a little bit about what you enjoy most about your current role?
Being creative and working for an organization where just because I did it this morning doesn't mean I'm going to do it this afternoon, right? That's trying new things, right? We're super big on, oh, that didn't work. Let's change it. Oh, we've been doing this for 2 years. It's not working now. Let's change it. I love it. I don't like being stuck, antiquated. Oh, we've always done it this way. Let's stay that way. No, let's change. Keep changing. That's the only way to get better.
Wonderful. So with that said, I want to say that's a wrap for today's episode of All On Board. Thank you, Eileen, for taking the time to speak with me. And for everyone out there, best of luck until next time as you get your whole team all on board. And remember, whether it's DEIB, whether it's employer brand, or it's internal communications, you got to bring it all together and think about the entire employee life cycle. Thank you for teaching us that, Eileen. Till next time, bye now.